Hi, Brad.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Great.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this short interview. Before we start, could you just briefly give us a short introduction of yourself?
Yeah, sure. Currently I'm an assistant professor in the exercise science program at Lehman College in the Bronx, New York. I also am head of the human performance lab there. I spent many years owning my own private facility as a personal trainer. Now my primary focus is in the education realm. I'm an educator, I'm a researcher, I'm a speaker, I speak internationally, I've written a lot of books. I'm a columnist for Muscular Development magazine. I'm also a consultant to Reebok and some other corporations. So I kind of get around, do a lot of things, and I still do have a small clientele that I do online coaching with. Mostly I focus with physique clients, high level, either bodybuilders or figure competitors.
And you're also a former bodybuilder yourself?
That is correct. For many years, I competed as a natural bodybuilder and won quite a few shows.
Impressive.
Thank you.
Okay, so the topic is the different mechanism for hypertrophy, and I thought we could just briefly start to explain the different mechanisms that we know about.
Sure. So in 2010, as part of my master's, or it was published in 2010, really it started in 2008 as part of my master's program. My final project, master's thesis project, was a review paper on hypertrophy. And mechanisms, basically, for those who don't know, are what causes muscles to grow. It's basically the underlying reasons that you're going to get a muscle to grow. And from the literature, I came up that with the premise that there are three primary mechanisms: mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. Now, mechanical tension are the forces that are placed on muscle. It's directly related to the amount of load that you're lifting. So if you're going to use a load that's closer to your 1 repetition maximum, that would have greater mechanical tension than if you're doing a load that's, let's say, 50% of your 1 RM. Mechanical tension is a primary driver, if not the primary driver, of hypertrophy. If there's no load, there's no impetus for growth. So a certain degree of mechanical tension is required. It's not clear what the necessary level of tension that is required to promote a hypertrophic response and then to maximize a response from there. I've done some work on EMG showing that loads of 70% or more maximize fiber recruitment, or fibrillation, if you will, because that takes into account rate coding and other factors, not just the recruitment of muscles, but also the firing rate, synchronization, and some other factors that, again, can influence hypertrophy. But it's more of a complex phenomenon because just because you don't recruit certain fibers, well, they might not hypertrophy, but if you recruit other fibers, specifically one fibers, for longer periods of time, that might have greater effects on them. So the time under tension factor is also going to come into it. Make a long story short, without getting too esoteric here, mechanical tension is a primary driver. You have to have a load that stimulates a fiber for a given period of time, a sufficient period of time to promote hypertrophy with a sufficient load. Metabolic stress has to do with metabolite buildup that is a byproduct of training. Generally speaking, higher repetitions, moderate to higher repetitions when you start getting into glycolysis, which is the breakdown of carbohydrates for fuel, is a primary driver of metabolic buildup, metabolic stress. And there's quite compelling evidence that metabolic stress can drive hypertrophy. There's multiple factors involved here. On a basic level, it can just be that the metabolic stress drives greater fiber recruitment, and that's been hypothesized. But there's multiple other factors, including increased cell swelling, the various myokine production, which are intrinsic factors that are released through the muscles themselves, either in the cell itself, which is called autocrine release, or paracrine release, which is between adjacent fibers. So there are various factors that potentially can drive metabolic stress, and certainly there's quite compelling evidence that metabolic stress is a factor of hypertrophy. And the final one is muscle damage, and that is where you get micro tears within muscles, and that's driven by the load to some extent, but also by the contraction mode. So eccentric actions tend to get greater muscle damage than concentric actions. The stretched position tends to get greater muscle damage than the shortened position. So certain factors can drive greater muscle damage. And at least theoretically, I wrote a paper on this, too much muscle damage is certainly a bad thing because it, if nothing else, it prevents you from training properly. And no damage would probably, at least seemingly, not or take out a potential driver of hypertrophy. So there seems to be a sweet spot within muscle damage that that can drive hypertrophy. Now, all this together, without rambling on too much, what remains to be determined is how additive each of these factors are. So one of the things that I'm looking at in research is there a sweet spot where mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage combined can be synergistic? Or is there a threshold by one, let's say you reach a certain level of mechanical tension, and then regardless of whether you get the other two factors involved, they're more redundant? That's not clear at this point. And really those are things that hopefully over time we'll get more knowledgeable about.
Thank you, Brad. The paper actually is one of the best papers I've read, and I recommend it to a lot of colleagues and a lot of students that I have. So it was a great contribution to the evidence-based society of fitness.
Thank you.
But when we're talking about the different mechanisms, obviously this is important to know when we talk about rep ranges that you should train with, because you often hear that if your goal is to maximize muscle growth, you should train only in the 6 to 12 repetition range. Is this true, or is it purpose to train with lower or higher reps than this range?
That is a great question. So I'm going to answer this tangentially and then hopefully tie this in. But it's interesting that it's been shown that you can grow on pretty much any repetition range. And work from my lab, I've done now multiple studies on this, where reps anywhere between 3 to 30 promote roughly the same hypertrophy. And there's not much difference at the whole muscle level. Now, there is some quite compelling evidence, specifically out of Russia, which does show that there are fiber type specific effects to training in different rep ranges. So higher repetitions with obviously lighter weights, if you're going to do, let's say, 20 reps, you're going to have to use much lighter weights to achieve a fatigue level within that rep range. They tend to promote greater type 1 fiber development, which is your slow twitch fibers, and that seems logical because your type 1 fibers fatigue, they're very difficult to fatigue, and thus extending a set over a longer period of time would tend to tap into their fatigability. Whereas your type 1 fibers fatigue very readily, very easily, and thus if you're training in a lower to moderate rep range, you're going to fatigue them. And thus, as long as you're getting a sufficient volume, you'll get a good fatigability within them. And thus, it has led to at least my speculation that combining moderate and low, moderate, and higher rep ranges would be optimal. And by the way, low repetition ranges also have been shown to enhance greater strength improvements. And thus, that is a potential driver if you can increase strength, and that translates into greater strength in a moderate rep range, then you would at least assume that you're going to get greater mechanical tension, and that can drive even more hypertrophy. I have just completed a study, or just published a study. I just have a study that has been accepted for publication. It hasn't actually come out, but it should be it should be published within the next 2 to 3 weeks. But it was accepted in the International Journal of Sports Medicine. It's a really good journal, really happy about it. And we essentially looked at a DUP, a daily undulating periodization, where we had a low repetition day, moderate rep day, and a high rep day versus a hypertrophy rep range, an 8 to 12 rep range. And the interesting findings were that there were no significant differences in the hypertrophy at the whole muscle level. Now, we didn't do biopsy to see whether there might have been differences at the fiber type level versus type 1, type 2, 2A, 2X. But while there weren't significant differences, and significant here has nothing to do with the magnitude of results. It has to do with the probability. So to say no significant results means that you cannot say with 95% or more confidence that the results were not due to chance. But we did effect size calculations, which is another statistical measure, and they did seem to show a potential benefit for the varied rep range. And the study duration was somewhat short. It was an 8-week study. Could extending that over 12, 16 weeks could that have made a difference? Perhaps. So the jury is still out, and at this point, my recommendation still is that I do believe you are going to get better results training through a spectrum of rep ranges. And certainly there is no credence to the fact that you need to only train in that's shown pretty clearly that you don't need to train in that hypertrophy range, that 6 to 12, 8 to 12 rep range to maximize growth.
Okay. I'm really looking forward to the paper that you mentioned, to read it. You have any time when it should be published?
Yeah, generally 2 to 3 weeks would be my guesstimate. It's obviously up to the journal, and each journal has their own timetable. But the journal in our acceptance letter said within the next few weeks, so I'm assuming they have a quick turnaround on that.
And I assume you will post it on Facebook when it comes?
I always do, yes. I'll post it and I'll discuss it.
Yeah. You also did another study recently where you looked at bro splits versus total body training. Yep. What was the main findings that you found in that study?
Yeah, so this was interesting. The typical bro split is like push-pull, chest and tries one day. We did a chest, back, and abs day, a leg day on day 2, and then shoulders and arms on day 3, which is another similar typical bodybuilding split, versus a total body routine where we did you train each of the major muscle groups Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So the actual number of exercises and the volume was completely equated. They did the exact same workout. It was just split up differently, where one did multiple muscle group exercises 1 day a week, where the other did one muscle group 3 days a week. So instead of doing like 9 sets for chest 1 day, 3 sets of presses, 3 sets of flies, 3 sets of incline presses, the other would do Monday a chest press, Wednesday a incline chest press, and Friday a chest fly. The split routine did not fare as well. So the muscle development was greater for the most part in the total body routine, which was somewhat surprising, given that a recent survey of bodybuilders showed that every single one of them was 126 bodybuilders. Every single bodybuilder trained with a split routine. So 126 out of 126. That tells you what bodybuilders think. Now, so here's the caveat to that. So what this tells you is that training a muscle more frequently seems to be more beneficial to muscle growth, provided that volume is equated. However, what a split routine does is allows you to get greater volume per muscle group. So it does afford you an ability to train more frequently during the week. Let's say you can do 4 days instead of 3 days. Really, if you're going to allow the generally accepted 48 hours between workouts, no disrespect to the Norwegian study, which I know did every muscle group every day or something. Yeah. But generally, for most people, that's not feasible. And it's just not, I think that needs more study anyway, because there's reason to think that that might not be the best for muscle growth over the long term as well. So given the customary 48 hours between muscle groups, really in the total body routine, you're limited to a 3-day-a-week routine, whereas a split routine, you could do a 4 or 5 day routine and still get, you can increase the volume per muscle group. And might that generate a greater hypertrophic response? It might. We didn't study that, so I can't say. That would be really the next thing to study, would be looking at if you take it more practical, real world, and then say, all right, I'm going to be able to do 20 sets for my chest rather than 9, and how will that affect hypertrophy? And that really needs to be seen. But I think what the study showed quite nicely that we did was that frequency does play a role here, and that on a volume equated basis, greater frequency seems to be a more important factor.
It will be interesting when it's called the Frequency Project here in Norway with the powerlifters, when it gets published, and if people can replicate it and see if they actually find the same findings that they did. I'm actually bringing one of the researchers to do an interview with him regarding the Frequency Project that also will be published on YouTube.
Interesting.
Yeah. But in regards to the bodybuilding survey that you mentioned, I think if I'm not forgetting, I think they actually most of them trained either once a week, and there were nobody that trained more than the muscle group more than twice a week.
That is correct.
Yeah.
So 60, roughly 2/3 trained each muscle group once a week, and the balance, the rest of the 1/3 or so, trained the muscles twice a week. No one trained 3 days a week. Here's what I will say. This should be noted. There is a lot of overlap. So when you do, let's say, a lat pull down, your the sternal head of your pectorals are going to be involved. When you're doing a shoulder press, your triceps are going to be involved. When you do a chest press, your anterior delt's going to be involved. So depending upon how you're splitting it up, ultimately you are going to train your muscle more than that frequency. Now, what type of stimulus they're getting, that can be discussed and argued, but it kind of is a misnomer, certainly with the upper body musculature in particular, to say that you're not getting you're not training the muscles more than once.
It's great that you mention it, because I think a lot of people forget that if you're training really frequently as well, there will be a lot of overlapping between the muscle groups.
Yep.
Okay, Brad. The final question is it's more towards when you get more advanced, because when you start as a beginner and lift weights, you usually get results just by exercising, and when you get to the intermediate levels, things start to get a bit harder. But when you get to the advanced level, it really gets hard to pack on more muscle size. What is the reason for this, that it gets more difficult to pack on muscle? And what's your advice on how you should modify your training when you reach that level? Actually, before you answer that question, what would you define as an advanced individual?
Yeah, that's really a difficult question, because it's not necessarily how many years of training. I mean, I know people that have trained 3 years and they train crappy, for lack of a better word, for 3 years and haphazardly. And I know people that train 6 months and they're really tight with their training and they're more advanced than the 3-year person. So difficult to quantify that in terms. I mean, when I do a study, we consider a trained subject someone that's training 1 year, minimum 1 year, and a minimum 3 days a week consistently without having breaks over that 1 year period. But like I said, it really comes down, there's a qualitative aspect to it. So hard to really quantify that for you or qualify it for you, other than to say that when you are one, you know it.
Yeah.
But why is there so yeah, obviously you don't keep growing the same way you did when you're a newbie, and that's a natural function, because humans are bred for survival, and the body, we're still living back in our Paleolithic era answer, with the anticipation that we're still living in the bodies of our Paleolithic ancestors, and that we have to hunt down food. And if you're a gigantic 400-pound muscular guy, you're going to be so slow, you're not going to be able to hunt properly. It's going to impede your ability to do the tasks necessary to carry out regular functions. So the body doesn't want to grow that big. It's going to downregulate certain functions and keep you within a range where it feels that you're going to be most functional. So you have what's called a ceiling effect, and the closer so everyone has a kind of a limit to where their genetics want to take them, and as you get closer to that limit, there's less room for growth. So if you're at 50% of your potential when you start, you got 50% more to go, your body can grow a lot fairly quickly. When you're up at 75%, and you got 25% left, your body will start to deny you. It's going to start to try to make it harder for you. And as you get up to that 95, 96, 97%, it's going to get harder and harder. And that happens, there's downregulation of anabolic signaling. And there's certain other factors that have been shown that will start to make it harder. What do? Well, you need to train more. The closer you get towards your genetic ceiling, the more scientifically you need to be about it. Generally speaking, I found that as you get more experience, you need more volume. Training with high volumes all the time makes you overtrained ultimately. So there's going to be, at some point, and this is going to be different for everyone, you keep training with really high volumes, the body will have a negative reaction ultimately, and you'll start to plateau and then even regress through increased incidence of illness and other factors that can come about. So really cycling, one of the things that I'm big on is having deload periods, cycling volume. So having regular deloads, meaning that you're going to, let's say, train high volume for several weeks, and then you have a week where you're training lower volume. And then even across periods where you have certain cycles, let's say you move from a 9 sets to 9 sets a week to 12 sets a week to 15 sets a week, and cycle that over the course of a given period of time, whether it's each month, 2 months. There's no set limit to this. This is really where the art of training comes in, and really you need to customize this to each individual. Making greater use of rep ranges, the spectrum of rep ranges, I think, becomes more important at that point to make sure you're getting all the different fiber types involved. So it really becomes more of a scientific endeavor. I modulate increases in volume with greater frequency. That's certainly, to me, the most viable way to do it. So you might have someone training 3 days a week for, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks, then training 4 days a week, 4 to 6 weeks, and then training 6 days a week, 4 to 6 weeks, then taking an active recovery phase. And this is a form of periodization. There's multiple ways where it can be carried out. One thing I'm really big on is that there's no right or wrong way, just the best way for a given individual in a given situation. And that's why I can, at this point, just talk in generalities. There is no cookie cutter prescription that I can give or that anyone can give. Anyone that says they have the ultimate routine for everyone is bullshitting. So you gotta run from them. There's no panacea as far as that goes. And ultimately, like I said, you can gain quickly in the initial stages doing almost anything, because anything is an overload stimulus at that point to someone who's been sedentary and not doing anything. But becoming more astute, I have a book, The Max Muscle Plan, just give a plug for that, where I lay out a template. But in that template, as I talk about throughout the book, is that you need to customize it to your own situation, and that it is, as I said, just a guideline that can be molded and should be molded to the individual.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the way it should be with both training and nutrition as well, that it should be customized to the individual. For instance, a lot of people will tolerate much more volume than other people. Other people will tolerate to train more frequently, while others might need more recovery between sessions. But when you talk about that the volume should go up for an advanced person, will it then be more appropriate to have the training frequency to go up as well? So you could divide the volume?
Yeah, I mentioned that.
Yeah.
So I mentioned that I generally modulate increases in volume with increased frequency. So they might start out at a 3-day-a-week routine, then go to a routine. So you might do a 3-day-a-week total body routine, modulate to a 4-day routine where you're doing an upper-lower split, and then you might do a kind of a bro split, doing 6 days a week, where you do 3 on 1 off, 3 on 1 off for periods of time. Now, training 6 days a week, the volume is going to be higher. So keeping the time of the session roughly the same. If you're keeping the volume per session the same, obviously training more frequently will increase volume over the course of that week. I have found that you can't, usually a 6-day-a-week routine for most people can't be sustained at proper intensities of effort for more than several weeks, more than 3 weeks or so. And that's why usually I think 3 to 4 day a week routines work best for given periods of time, and you use a 6-day-a-week routine kind of as a shock phase, and really that's where you're going to maximize, you super compensate. But you're not going to really, when you're looking at these, it's a matter of eking out those last little bit of gains. So you're going to be growing a few pounds a year at that point. It would be good for a natural trainee, would be good progress. Whereas during the early phases of training, I mean, you can gain dozens of pounds of muscle over the course of time.
Yeah, and you see, I've heard you mention it on Facebook a couple of times that you see a lot of individual differences with what people actually can gain in a given time frame.
Absolutely. So it's really important to understand that people, when we do research, we talk in averages, the means, but you'll see huge individual differences as you look at different, in any research study that I do. So there'll be huge variations. Some people, and the funny thing is that the variations can be within given muscles. So I'll have one subject that grows almost nothing or almost nothing in their triceps and gets large increases in their quads, and another person would be the opposite, where they get almost nothing in the quads and large increases in the triceps, doing the exact same routine. Part of that might be due to the fact that they're neglecting certain muscle groups, and simply being in a structured routine is addressing those needs. Others, it also might be that they're more predisposed towards growing in certain areas. So it's interesting, and you have to appreciate that inter-individual differences do have play a big role in how someone's going to grow, and those are things that you have to, especially if you're looking at it from a physique. If your goal is to compete in a physique or just to be well proportioned, you have to look at symmetry. And unfortunately, in that realm, people like to train the muscles that grow a lot, and that just makes them go out of proportion more to the muscles that don't, which is really the opposite of what you should be looking at.
Yeah, I totally agree. Usually the chest and biceps are the favorite parts people like to train, and neglect the legs.
It's the nightclub workout, you got to look at carrying a beer and a tank top.
Yeah. Okay, Brad, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. I know you have a really busy schedule, especially now when you have a lot of research going on.
Yeah.
If someone wants to read more about your articles and research, where can they find information about that?
Yeah, sure. I have a website, an active website with tons of free content, and a blog at lookgreatnaked.com. So that should be easy to remember. Look Great Naked, not Look Good Naked, because Look Good Naked, I heard, is a porn site. So this is Look Great Naked. This is fitness info, and my email is, people can email me through my site as well.
Great. And you also have some books that they are available at Amazon.com, right?
Correct. My most recent book is called The Max Muscle Plan, which is a total body routine for optimizing your muscular potential. And I have a book coming out that's geared towards women in April called Strong Sculpted, and that should be available shortly. So Max Muscle Plan, that's been available for a few years now, and both of them, Max Muscle is available on Amazon now, and Strong and Sculpted should be within the next several weeks, I would think. It's coming out in April.
Excellent. Okay, Brad, thank you so much. Take care, and hopefully we'll speak soon again.
My pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.
You too.